God forgive us if our first, second, or fifth thought when a war breaks out in Israel is, now I'm closer to knowing. And now I can predict it out. And now I can plan it. Maybe we're not supposed to predict it. Maybe it's not up to us to plan. Maybe we're not supposed to write best-selling books. On the same day that a new war broke out in Israel, multiple earthquakes registered across the globe. Many Christians were quick to point to Jesus' own description of the end times in Matthew's gospel. He talks about wars, rumors of wars, and even earthquakes. So what is really going on in Israel, and is it helpful to leverage this moment for our end time predictions? Now, here's kind of how I want to cover this. I'm going to talk very briefly about the war that is now going on. And the reason I'm not going to try to give some long-winded, complex view of this is because the situation in the Middle East is overwhelmingly complex. And I am not a Middle Eastern foreign policy expert. There's no way I understand all of the history and all of the nuance. There are people who understand all that, and you can listen to them. For me, who focuses on theology, focuses on pastoring my church, for me, I'm going to try to go to the baseline. And the baseline, there are some things that seem factual and somewhat simple. The first is that the Jewish people, all the way back into biblical times, have always had other nations or other people groups who want them exterminated. There's been rampant anti-Semitism, including in some pockets in the Christian church. And anytime you are targeting a group of people like that, obviously it is evil. Obviously it is abhorrent to God. And there has been so much tension, and now it feels like we have passed a threshold. And so how exactly do we think about this? Well, perfect peace does not seem achievable when there's one side in the conflict who is playing a zero-sum game. That's one of the simple conclusions I think we can come to. If one person is playing a zero-sum game, you cannot win an argument because they don't care about what's right or wrong. They care about destroying you. A lot of people have said this in a lot of different ways, and I think it gets to the heart of the matter. You have Hamas, which is a terrorist group. You have Israel, which is a democracy. And the way that it's been said that makes a lot of sense is with these two sides, if one of them chose to go guns down, you'd have very different circumstances. If Hamas decided to go guns down, you'd have peace. Now, I know that Israel, like all nations, like all people, have not been perfect in all of this. Sure, who is? That can't be the expectation. And there are some people who are very pro-Palestinian and very anti-Israeli and anti-Zionist movement, and all of the thing is very complex. And I'm not going to get into all that. Here's what I know. If Hamas goes guns down, and maybe they've passed the threshold now, as of this week, but previous to that, then you have peace. If Israel goes guns down, Israel ceases to exist. And so a lot of people were talking about the Hamas Charter or the Hamas Covenant. This is their official guiding documents. Here are a couple of excerpts from Article 7 of the Hamas Covenant. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jew, killing the Jews. And when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees, the stones and trees will say, "O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him." It's very clear. I read their charter. The call is for the extermination of the Jewish people, period, point blank. Then this is really where you get to the zero-sum game. In Article 13 from the Hamas Charter, initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. Initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences, what they're saying is very clear. There's no peaceful solution. We're not coming to the table with anyone. We don't care what the international community has to say about this. We are here for the extermination of these people, and we are going to fight until we get it. Peace is not achievable when one side is playing a zero-sum game. And so what we should do as Christians is, number one, we should be in prayer. We should be in prayer for peace. We should be in prayer for resolution, for God's will, for people to come to the saving knowledge of Jesus. That should be our heart in all of this. And instead, what you've seen, not from everyone and maybe not even broadly, but from some segments of Christianity, is as soon as anything happens in the Middle East, and especially in Israel, if a fig leaf falls off the wrong tree in Israel, they're writing up a sermon about how Jesus is coming back. And because of that moment, they now know the year and the month and the day and the hour. There is an entire marketplace of end times predictions. I don't know what the dollar amount is. It's got to be millions and millions and millions of dollars. People have made their careers off of this. People have written, bestseller books off of this. What's so crazy to me is the same people have written different best-selling books where the last book was wrong. People still buy the new book because it's like people have this deep desire to know exactly when it's going to happen. And so that's the question. Is this war a sign of the return of Jesus? Like you said, wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes. So let's look at where that's taken from. That's taken from Matthew chapter 24. It says in verse 3, while Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus replied to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I'm the Messiah, and they will deceive many. And you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. So see that you're not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. And all these events are the beginning of labor pains." And of course, people have interpreted that in so many different ways. But the people who are desperate to know the year and the month and the day and the hour, they take wars and rumors of wars. And then there were people who were tweeting out like, "Oh my gosh, there were 3 different earthquakes registered today. And one of them was on this side of the hemisphere, and one of them was on this side of the hemisphere." And so here's just like a general rule of following Christ and being a good Berean, like studying your scripture, is get more context. And so one of the things I did immediately, I got curious and I Googled, how many earthquakes are there every day? And on average, I wonder what you would guess. I bet there's at least an earthquake a day. Like the globe that we live on is very big. According to Google, there are on average 55 earthquakes every day.
Wow.
Like 20-something thousand earthquakes a year. And so it's like, there's a war in Israel and there's multiple earthquakes. It's like, sure, man. And this is the problem. This is how like psychics work. This is how astrology works, is you have enough variables that you can pull something together. This is how really like cheap and not well-researched personality tests work. It's like, there's enough variables that you can make it fit into your circumstance. And what you got to do is get more context, because if we go back to Matthew 24, what we see is that then Jesus talks about how we're going to be persecuted. And he talks about the great tribulation and the coming of the Son of Man. And he gives a parable about the fig tree. But then he says, now. So now that's one of those transitional words. Like I've said a lot, but let me say why I'm saying it. Or let me give you some new information to read all of this through. Now, concerning the day and hour, no one knows. So number one, if somebody has tried to convince you, or you showed up to church yesterday on October 8th, and your pastor had written the day before, scratched whatever sermon he was going to do, wrote a new sermon because there's war in Israel, so now he knows the exact time Jesus is coming back, no one knows. That's what Jesus said. Neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, no one but the Father. And as the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. And just like until Noah stepped in that ark and the flood came, everyone was just living it up and going to work and marrying and going to parties. And all of a sudden the flood came and wiped everyone off. That's what it's going to be like. So we can try to read the signs and read the tea leaves and put it all into the algorithm and every new world event, you just add it into your calculus and you try to come up with the answer. And some people I truly believe have had nefarious means for doing that. And on the Clayton podcast, we try to give the absolute best read and we try to just, assign ignorance instead of malevolence. And I want to say, I have friends, I have people I care about who are very interested in eschatology, and that's the study of the end. But they approach it with humility, the kind of humility that should be just automatic when Jesus himself said, dude, you don't know. And so what's the purpose of trying to look at the end? And what's the purpose of always wanting all of the answers? And why do we so badly want to be able to call this in such a clear and concise way? After Jesus gives kind of these end time, signs and stuff, and then says, now, before you build the rest of your ministry trying to predict my return. Don't do that. Nobody knows. Then he goes on to talk about like living with a sense of urgency and being prepared in the way that you carry yourself and keeping your eyes on Christ and believing in him and finding your hope in him. And that's what he comes to talk about in the rest of 24 and chapter 25. And the rest of the New Testament, especially the epistles, where the apostles are writing these letters back to their churches, they're always telling them to keep their eyes on the coming of Christ, but not to try to predict it. It's something very, very different than that. I want us to look at Paul's letter to the Romans. This is in Romans chapter 8. He says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not even worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us." He's like, look, dude, I know that you're suffering. I know that you go through a lot in this life, and especially back then when they were under persecution. But to follow Jesus, remember, Jesus gave us the equation. You deny yourselves. So like your own attractions, your own dreams, your own desires, your own initiatives. You deny yourself, your sin, your habits. You take up your cross, so you intentionally suffer for the benefit of others, and then you can follow after Jesus. So you are suffering, you're giving things up. You're giving away like way more money than you could ever imagine that you were going to give away. You're living a generous life. The way that you manage your relationships, the sexual gratification that you have delayed in order to like fulfill God's design for sexual union, all of these ways that you could potentially be suffering. He says, I consider that as like nothing. It's not even worth comparing to the glory that's ahead of us. He's keeping his eyes on the end, but not to make a prediction. It's to live with purpose. He says, for the creation eagerly waits. And he goes through all this about how even the creation, the world itself was affected by our sin. And all of us are longing to get free from that. He says, not only that, but we ourselves who have the Spirit, believers, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for our adoption, the redemption of our bodies, this moment in eternity where soul meets body and we're finally the complete people that we were created to be. Now look what he says. In this hope we were saved, but hope that is seen is not hope, because who hopes for what he sees? If we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with patience. And I think this gets to the heart of it. Who hopes for what he sees? We want to see it. We want to know the answer. And God forgive us if our first, second, or fifth thought when a war breaks out in Israel is, now I'm closer to knowing. And now I can predict it out. And now I can plan it. Maybe we're not supposed to predict it. Maybe it's not up to us to plan. Maybe we're not supposed to write best-selling books because we, as these unique people, have this gnosis. That was the Gnostic heresy in Jesus' day, the special secret revealed knowledge that nobody else has. I know when he's coming, and I can tell you, and it's on page 348 of my $20 book. Get it now on Amazon. Like maybe we're supposed to have actual hope. And hope is full faith and trust in something that we can't see, in a date that we don't know. And what I'm really trying to say is our sense of spiritual urgency should come from internal conviction, not from external events. Our sense of spiritual urgency should come from the reality that Jesus came and gave his life for us and has made a way for us to live the fullness of life that we were created for. We should live with the end in mind because we know that someday we will stand before Jesus. And it's not about prediction. It's about a life of purpose right here and right now. And if we could get that right, and if we could add that into our rhythms, then our first reaction to a war breaking out in Israel should be, people are dying. And it's our job, our marching orders are to go into the whole world, to love everyone, even our enemies, which is really hard to think about, to be honest with you, in a situation like that's playing out in the images that we're seeing online right now. And to take the gospel to these people, even at cost to ourselves. And what is our role in this? And I'll just go to bat for the fact it's not to sit and try to be Nostradamus and predict this out. Our job is to be the hands and feet of Jesus to a hurting and broken world. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Clayton Tyner podcast. If you want to watch the full podcast, you can check that out somewhere right around here. And if you want to subscribe, you can do that right over here somewhere. Also, you can follow me at Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner on Twitter and Instagram. I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with everything that we're doing.